This series discusses crime scenes, details regarding unidentified decedents, discussion of drug use, and references to historic media that may use outdated language regarding a variety of social issues, including topics like immigration, housing insecurity, and sex work. Listener discretion is advised. This is The Fall Line. Over the past few years, we've brought you to Tennessee as often as we have to Georgia, our home state, to Nashville, and to Davidson County. In our time covering 4 cases from different eras, the earliest dating back to the 1970s, you've heard us talk about Nashville, past and present, from a variety of different angles. There was the disappearance on the edges of a nationally recognized music festival, the unsolved homicides from the 1990s that reflected a period when Nashville saw some of its highest rates of violence. We've covered 2 unidentified women, including one whose remains cannot be recovered because she's buried in a cemetery where the markers were removed. This season, we're bringing you the most extensive coverage of Nashville cases that we've ever taken on, and to do it, we're going to need to get a lot more specific. Get down to neighborhoods, streets, and moments in time. These cases stretch over decades, and some occurred in areas that look wholly different now. Buildings torn down, roads reimagined. Maybe a lifelong Nashville resident would recognize a description of a long-gone building. Actually, we're counting on that. We need that help. In some of the other unresolved cases, they're as recent as this year. The 22 files we started with this season, classified as unidentified decedents, or John and Jane Does, are all unique. Some are a few pages long, others are full of incredible detail. A few are well on their way to being solved via forensic investigative genetic genealogy. In others, your help is vital because the victims' remains are no longer available, and the help of the public is our best bet at reconnecting these individuals with their identities. In one case, surprising answers came during our research, due to consultation with an expert. But in nearly every other case we will discuss this season, you have a vital part to play. Whether you're a Tennessee resident or not, we need you to circulate possible names, forensic art, even renderings of victims' jewelry, to share regions and surnames of relatives that are needed for genealogical target testing. The information is there, sometimes in abundance, and sometimes not. But that is the thing about a cold case that's never been widely circulated. The right piece of information just has to reach one person, the person with their own piece of knowledge that fills in the blanks to help close a case. So, that is our shared project this season, to work together. Because if there's one thing we've learned making this show, it's that social media, used well, is the great equalizer in cold cases. We've seen that for ourselves. So, maybe you can make that your goal. Help us reach that one person this season. And as you'll see in later episodes, sometimes the information really is just waiting out there. We've organized the cases this season into episodes focused on themes, and we're beginning with 2 of the most recent cases we received from Metro Nashville Police. They're the cases of 2 women whose remains were discovered on opposite sides of the city, east and west, about 5 years apart. In 2018, in Nashville, the days trailing out of August were hot, and even into the first week of September, it wouldn't have felt anything like fall was really on the way. In northwest Nashville, on a quiet road, county crews mowed the grass as they usually did, around the 1st of September. Apparently, nothing was amiss when they came through, and based on the layout of the road, from the photos published in the papers, it seems likely that they would have noticed if there was something wrong. That is one clear marker in time for trying to pinpoint when someone drove down Sulphur Creek Drive. Certainly, someone who did not want to be noticed. Because, at some point, a young woman's body was placed 4 or 5 feet off that road, in what police describe as a ditch or a culvert. She was purposefully obscured with branches and other vegetation, and it would be some time before witnesses discovered her remains and called authorities. The quiet neighborhood was shaken by this news, as one resident told Fox 17 in 2018, quote, "I thought it was pitiful. It was sad. It was a precious person whose life was ripped away as a piece of trash on the side of the road. I'm sad for this lady. A person's life has been taken. She's gone, and nobody can do anything about it, except try and find out more about her." The victim, who's best known now as the Vandy Jane Doe, was discovered on Saturday, September 18th, 2018, along Sulphur Creek Road in northwest Davidson County. If you're from Tennessee, that nickname, Vandy, it might already make sense. It's short for Vanderbilt, as in Vanderbilt University. As investigators began to assess the scene that day, one detail was immediately apparent. The victim had been dressed, nearly head to toe, in Vanderbilt University branded clothing. That connection has remained a key point in the investigation, because, as you'll hear in a moment, the young woman's clothing was very distinct. Not so much in that she wore Vanderbilt gear, which is certainly popular in Tennessee, but that she wore so much of it. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, her, quote, apparel and accessories bore the Vanderbilt University logo. She was wearing a black quarter-zip Under Armour brand top with Vandy in gold stitching in capital letters under the white Vanderbilt V within the gold star, as well as Zuzat's brand leggings that had the white Vanderbilt B inside the gold star in a widespread geometric pattern. She also wore a Zuzat's brand black running hip band with a zip pocket with the Vanderbilt logo, end quote. In case you're unfamiliar with the term hip band, as we were, its alternate name is a hip rocker. Detective Filter from Nashville PD actually showed us an example. It's a thin, circular belt-like piece of material that runners or other athletes might wear to store keys or other small items during a workout. This Vanderbilt gear was an immediate lead for investigators, and it was all they could assess at the scene because, per WZTV, the young woman was found in an advanced state of decomposition. It would take further work from medical legal professionals to build out a possible victim profile. As law enforcement told News Channel 5 at the time of her discovery, there were no obvious signs of trauma or of any roadway accident, so her death was not a clear hit-and-run case. But she had certainly been hidden along Sulphur Creek Road, and she had not done that to herself. Soon, Metro Nashville PD released further information to the public. Per NCMEC, the young woman was thought to be somewhere between the ages of 15 and 25. She was also described as Black and/or possibly Hispanic or Latino, and between 5 feet and 5 foot 5 inches tall. There was a presence of drugs in her system, which could indicate a possible overdose, but again, her body was hidden. So, someone else was involved, at least after her passing. In addition to her Vanderbilt branded clothing, she was also noted as wearing a black and green leopard print sports bra, a black undershirt, and a white metal rope-style necklace that NCMEC notes was the From the Heart brand. There was evidence that this necklace had had a charm at some point, but it was missing at the time that she was discovered. So, Vandy Jane Doe, she may have been a teenager, from all appearances a possible student. Per News Channel 5, MNPD had begun to review missing persons reports as soon as she was discovered, and there were so many details. It seemed, at least initially, that her identity would soon be discovered. But that didn't happen. Brooke and I both spoke with Detective Matthew Filter regarding the cases that we're covering this season, to make sure we talked about both the areas of Nashville we're discussing this season and the details of the cases. So, as you're listening to interviews, you'll hear us both speak at various points. And though we're certainly close to Tennessee down here in Georgia, we don't know as much about Vanderbilt University and its student body as a local might, and how prevalent the branded merchandise for the university is. So, Detective Filter provided us with background on the school and a lot more.
Vanderbilt is a major university that has been in Nashville for about 150 years. They have a student body of about 14,000 students and offer degree programs in just about everything you can think of. Besides the school, Vanderbilt also has a hospital, which is one of the biggest hospitals in the Middle Tennessee area and is a level 1 trauma center. Between the school and the hospital, Vanderbilt employs thousands of people. So Vanderbilt is also a NCAA Division I school in the SEC. So when you take into consideration the number of students, including alumni, staff, and the university being in a city of almost 700,000 people, that is going to create a lot of fans, which is going to result in Vanderbilt clothing being seen regularly. Although not as prominent as University of Tennessee clothing, Vanderbilt merchandise is sold in several stores, including various sites online. Very common for someone that doesn't have any direct ties to Vanderbilt to just be a fan of the Vanderbilt Commodores.
So, does the department believe that she could have been a student?
Based on her estimated age range, she very easily could be a student. However, we requested Vanderbilt check their student roster to see if by chance a registered student never showed or quit attending classes shortly after the start of the school year. They couldn't find anyone fitting that pattern, and they did not have any staff missing that they were aware of. If she wasn't a student, she could have been a Vanderbilt fan or maybe had a friend or family member that attended or worked at Vanderbilt. One possibility, too, is the Vice Lord Street Gang has been known to wear Vanderbilt clothing because of the V logo, but we don't have any information to connect her to Vice Lord activity. Vandy clothing is a little more expensive, like any well-known team merchandise, because you're paying for the Vanderbilt name or logo. So it just automatically kind of bumps up the price. Considering she was wearing all athletic type clothing, one might infer that she was an athlete or at least liked to work out. But when you see clothing styles continually get more casual, it's not uncommon for people to wear athletic style clothing for its comfort factor.
So I know that you and Brooke talked a lot about Vanderbilt University for our friends who are not from Tennessee. Do you think that the fact that she was wearing Vanderbilt clothing is necessarily an indication that she was from Tennessee or a current Tennessee resident? Or should we be more broad in our thinking? There are a lot of ways that someone can come to obtain clothing, after all, particularly if they receive it secondhand or borrow it.
I never want to eliminate any possibilities until I have conclusive evidence. So anyone that fits the description should be considered a possible match until ruled out by scientific or other means.
Of course, Vanderbilt clothing points to Tennessee ties, but friends share clothing. People buy gear of their favorite universities and teams, and nearly every young person I know loves thrifting. So, as the detective says, everything should be considered, and you should not rule out a missing person who matches Vandy Doe's description, but is known to have lived outside Tennessee. People do travel. Authorities still don't know why she was found in the area where she was. Locals confirmed that they did not recognize the forensic art prepared by NCMEC, which you can find on our social media. We asked Detective Filter to provide us more detail regarding the location so listeners could better understand.
The area she was found is not a high traffic area. Sulphur Creek is a country road, and only single family residences with acreage are on this road. The only people that would normally use this road would be locals using it as a shortcut to get from Old Hickory Boulevard to Eaton's Creek Road and vice versa. There is nothing on this road to draw people to it.
So, really fairly isolated.
Really, the only legitimate reason to be on this road would be if you actually lived on it or if you were using it as a shortcut. But even when you look at a map, using it as a shortcut isn't really much of a shortcut unless you're going to a location that's at the end of the road somewhere.
That could speak to the fact that, as authorities told multiple news outlets back in 2018, they believe that Vandy Jane Doe had been dumped in the area. Her case is being investigated as a homicide with Metro Nashville, and I asked Detective Filter why that's the best approach in situations such as these, where the cause of death is not determined, but there's clear evidence of human involvement after the victim's death. But, as he told us, that's not the only circumstance where homicide is the best designation. Although the Vandy Jane Doe's cause of death and manner of death could not be determined, her death is being investigated as a homicide. Can you explain why it's best to take that approach in this case?
Every death investigation should be approached as a homicide. The reason for this is sometimes the manner of death is not obvious, or the scene could be staged to make the death appear as something else, such as an accident or suicide, or in some cases, even a natural death rather than a homicide. If the scene is not properly investigated and it is later determined the death is a homicide, potential evidence may be lost, and that could mean the difference between solving the case or the case going cold.
Approaching an investigation as an assumed crime scene is something I've discussed with investigators before. It's something that is clearly appropriate in a case like Vandy Jane Doe's, but it may be less so when a person comes across what may be historic human remains. An example of that might be an old unmarked grave. Not a clandestine one, but perhaps a small cemetery that's lost its marker. It's an issue that forensic anthropologists deal with all the time, the forensic cases versus the historic cases. But for law enforcement, coming upon a death investigation, as Detective Filter said, whether it seems to be an accident, suicide, or unclear based on the circumstance, the best practice there is to maintain as much evidence as possible by treating it as a homicide. Not only does that retain evidence, but in the event that a case goes cold, hopefully, future detectives will have the maximum available information from which to work. Earlier in the episode, we mentioned that the grass was mowed on Sulphur Creek Road around the 1st of September, and that detail is important because it gives investigators a timeline, not only in regard to missing persons and time of death, but also to possible witnesses who may have been in the area. We discussed this with Detective Filter during our interviews.
I believe she was placed there after the grass was cut. She wasn't that well hidden. She was off the road and concealed enough that someone passing by may not see her or recognize her as a body, but I believe someone moving slowly along the side of the road cutting the grass would have recognized her as a body. I think this would narrow the time frame of when she was placed on the side of the road.
As Detective Filter explained, it's likely that Vandy Jane Doe was left on Sulphur Creek Road soon after her death, and that may have occurred anywhere between 5 to 10 days prior to her discovery. But he reminded us that environment can play a role in estimated PMI, or postmortem interval, so we shouldn't exclude any missing persons whose disappearance may fall out of that range. Indeed, if Vandy Jane Doe was a teenager, especially in that youngest age range, she might have been missing for much longer, perhaps a runaway, or in another situation. She may have even come from another state. We mentioned that drugs were found in her system, which some out there might not necessarily associate with college students. And Vandy Jane Doe could certainly be a student, though she does not seem to have been at Vanderbilt, at least in the period preceding her discovery. But as we discussed with Detective Filter, that's a misconception. Drug use does not necessarily tell us anything about who a person may have been in life.
Can you talk about drugs that are prevalent in Nashville and any misconceptions we might have about who is affected?
So, most of the prevalent drugs in Nashville are probably opioid based drugs, but cocaine, marijuana still very common as well. The victim had a cocaine metabolite and morphine in her system, which quite honestly could be found in just about any individual's background. And I would not find it unusual to see college students using drugs of this type.
In many of the Doe cases that we cover, there's little press to review. often a single short article. But Vandy Jane Doe has been covered by local media a number of times, and NCMEC has made her case a focus as well. In addition to preparing forensic art, they've shared her description widely on social media and through their official channels, which are a powerful force. NCMEC takes an unidentified person's case much farther than it might otherwise go, and because of that, tips have come in. NCMEC has been able to rule out a number of possible matches in Vandy Jane Doe's case. But so far, the right person has not been found. Though her DNA samples were collected, that was one of the ways that comparisons were made. It was not the kind of SNP DNA profile that we've discussed in the podcast before. That's the type of profile that's needed for forensic investigative genetic genealogy. And for that reason, Metro Nashville PD made the decision to exhume the Vandy Jane Doe. According to WKRN, that decision came in the fall of 2022, a little over 4 years after she was discovered. At the time, Detective Filter told the news station that they rarely were faced with such a long-standing Doe case of these parameters, a young person found relatively soon after death. He noted that it was unusual that they hadn't yet found a matching missing persons report. Quote, "Nobody is looking for this person, and that's just what makes this case set apart from some of the other ones." It is possible, though, that someone is out there looking, but that a formal report hasn't been filed. In fact, we think it's likely that friends or other loved ones are. Sometimes, the people who are closest to a person don't even know that they can file a report because they aren't family, especially if the missing person is young or if their friends are afraid of some complicating factors in their own lives, often legal problems. That's why the step of forensic investigative genetic genealogy is so important in Vandy Jane Doe's case. Metro Nashville needs to find connections that have just not surfaced. Since October 2022, that process has progressed. A viable profile was developed, and Detective Filter tells us that genealogy work has begun. He was also able to give us a more precise ancestry estimation for Vandy Jane Doe, which may help match her with a missing person.
A recent report that I received showed that she was almost 50-50 African and European, mostly Italian. And there were two names associated with her ancestry or very prominent with her ancestry, and that was Mangarelli and Hayes. The locations of the closest relatives they found so far are going to be Louisiana, Texas, and Georgia.
Those are the most important leads so far, and they're the ones that we need you to concentrate on. That Vandy Jane Doe had family connections in Louisiana, Texas, and Georgia, and that the surnames Mangarelli and Hayes appear in her family tree. Her NCMEC art is posted on our social media, just as we did in the case of Leo Jane Doe. And just as we asked in the case of Leo Jane Doe, we need you to help share the specific information, especially if you live in one of those states. We hope that we can get these details out to people who recognize those last names and who will contact Metro Nashville PD with information. If you recognize those names or her description, there will be information at the end of our show, or you can find it right now in our show notes. Vandy Jane Doe's death investigation will not stop with her identification, but it is a vital step in finding out what happened to her. Now we travel to the other side of the city, in unincorporated Metro Nashville. It's east of the city proper, and the Tennessean writes that the area was once a company town for the DuPont plant. The area is a mix of historic buildings and industrial areas, and in 2017, the Tennessean reported that the echoes of the company town are still apparent. One resident told the Tennessean in 2017 that the area was also, quote, almost like a thoroughfare for State 45. Orchard Drive is about 3 minutes off Route 45, and just a little farther east. It's a residential street lined with homes and cars with thick woods that are backed up to one side. It's also the location where, in 2023, skeletal remains were discovered. Detective Filter gave us a little more background on the location.
Orchard Drive Doe was found in the Old Hickory area of Nashville. This is predominantly an industrial area along the Cumberland River with a small neighborhood on the south side of the community. The location of the remains was on a road that went around the backside of several businesses. This was a very desolate location, and the only people likely to have seen something were employees at the closest business if they happened to be outside in that particular area at the time. The remains were just a few feet into a wooded area and down an embankment.
On January 5th, 2023, partial human remains were discovered by a local resident who called authorities, and medical legal investigators discovered, over a day's search, further skeletal remains in the area. Through Metro Nashville PD's investigation, it became apparent that at least one other person had reported possible bones in the area before, actually, several years before. But the investigators that were sent out then had been unable to locate them. The description of where the remains might be simply had not been specific enough. This time, though, they did pinpoint that area, and they spread out to search for any possible clues. They did not have any clear indication as to identity at the scene, but later examination would give them more to go on. Clothing found with the victim included black size 8 or 8.5 shoes, a size 14 Levi's guy fit low-rise jeans, and what's described as an extra-large green windbreaker jacket. Although the experts were not able to determine sex at the time of discovery, a later anthropological exam noted that the victim was a presumed adult female of European ancestry, white, likely between 25 and 35 years of age, and likely between the height of 5'1" and 5'8". So, these were the remains of another young woman, almost certainly an adult, but young, who seemed to have been hidden off a road in an out-of-the-way neighborhood in Nashville. Though she was found more than 4 years after Vandy Jane Doe, Orchard Drive Jane Doe had likely been missing as long, or even longer. That initial report of someone coming upon bones in the woods, it created a timeline. According to what Detective Filter told us, that initial tip they received came in 2016, though law enforcement was not able to verify its veracity then.
The skull was originally found in January 2016, so I would estimate the decedent had been there since at least the summer of 2015 or earlier. With the lab saying the bones are highly degraded, it is possible the decedent had been there much longer. Neither the anthropologist nor the medical examiner gave an opinion on the length of time the decedent had been out there.
Because Orchard Jane Doe was discovered after such a long interval as compared to Vandy Jane Doe, it's more difficult to ascertain how the scene may have appeared closer to the time of her death. For instance, what a witness would or would not notice. If her body was hidden, as in the case of Vandy Jane Doe. One consideration is that she was deeper in a wooded area, though it was still a populated area. We wondered if there was a possibility that she had actually been buried at any point, and whether that information could be useful to investigators. Based on the scene, do you have any thoughts as to whether the decedent was actually buried in a clandestine grave and then was scattered, perhaps due to animal activity?
I don't believe she was initially buried. The remains were found approximately 50 yards from the roadway, across an open area at the edge of some woods, and just a few feet from the top of a steep ridge. I believe the decedent was carried from the roadway, or a car could have driven into the open grassy area closer to the wood line, and she was thrown down the ridge. I think over the years, dirt and debris naturally covered over the remains. The only part of the body that was found in a different area was the skull. From there, I think an animal or other wildlife moved the skull to where it was found.
And do we have further information regarding possible cause of death?
No, the cause of death was never able to be determined.
As with Vandy Jane Doe, Orchard Jane Doe's case is being investigated as a homicide. They have no cause of death, no toxicology, but they have the knowledge that someone hid her body, and that is a deliberate act that can help them connect each link in her case once her identity is known. An unidentified person's case is not over once they are identified, not in homicide or possible homicide. But the case does open up, and the strings between cause and effect can become clear. Our human connections, our movements, which person saw us last, our digital trails, all the information that's needed to solve a crime. That is what investigators need. And so the first step is to look for that missing person who might be the match. There were tips that came in from the community, and according to Brooks' interview with Detective Filter, it was suggested that Metro Nashville look at a woman named Sheila Ann Carver from South Carolina. According to the Anderson Independent Mail, Sheila Ann Carver disappeared in June of 1998 from Seneca, South Carolina. She was 33 years old at the time of her disappearance. Her family grew concerned when she was not in contact for Father's Day, which was out of character, and so they contacted authorities. Police discovered that though Sheila was missing from her home, her new car was parked right outside. By March of 1999, her family told the Mail that they, quote, suspected foul play, and that, quote, she'd never been away for more than a day or two without being in contact. Sheila was described as 5'11", 180 pounds, and blue-eyed and brown-haired. In 1999, there was a $5,000 reward offered in her case, but based on local reporting as recent as 2021, no strong leads came in. By that time, WSPA reported that authorities were directly stating that they too believed that foul play was involved. Detective Filter in Nashville has Sheila on his list, but he has also found other cases as well, including one that he considers to be a strong lead. Unlike Vandy Jane Doe's case, there are no rule-outs. This time, the issue lies on the scientific side of things, as Detective Filter explained to us.
The original lab had a hard time developing a profile due to a high degradation factor. So the bones have since been sent to another lab that specializes in historical remains. We have not received the results back yet, hoping that we will receive them in the next few weeks. The case is also pending CODIS entry with the FBI.
There are labs that specialize in working with historic or degraded remains. Straya Forensics, who've been featured on the Fall Line, are an example. And as Detective Filter told us, they're currently working with a similar lab to attempt a successful profile. The issue here is not that they're attempting a SNP profile, the DNA profile needed for investigative genetic genealogy. They're simply trying to develop the more classic STR profile that's used for any comparison. That will be vital in the department's attempts to compare Orchard Jane Doe with missing women across Tennessee and in other states. They are still actively seeking tips and leads in Orchard Jane Doe's case. Though there is no forensic art available, her clothing description, age range, and stature may be useful in encouraging leads. We have prepared a flyer with that information for you to post on social media. And if you have any possible match suggestions that you'd like to pass on to us to compile for MNPD, we'll absolutely do so. Or you can submit your possible matches to NamUs. We'll have a link to Orchard Jane Doe's NamUs profile in our show notes as well. These two cases are comparatively recent, and recent cases do have the best chances of being solved, though every case has that hope. But we do need you to help us now. So please, take a moment to listen to these descriptions again and visit our Instagram or Facebook account to get the shareable information for your social media. Again, getting these shares is vital. And we realize, when we discuss human remains, we know that talk can feel disconnected from the emotional stories of people. But you have to remember, that's because they have been forcibly separated from those stories. The key word here is human. Their families and loved ones are out there, and they are waiting, and they are looking, and they need to know what happened to their loved ones. And if these women were murdered, those crimes need to be solved too. This is all about reconnecting threads. Any of us could become disconnected. Caring about an unidentified person's case is caring about a missing person's case. With that in mind, please listen to see if you recognize any of these details once more. The teenager or young woman known as Vandy Jane Doe was discovered in the Sulphur Creek Drive area of northwest Nashville on September 8, 2018. She may have been missing for a week or longer. She's described as a female of African and European ancestry, probably between 15 to 25 years old, and between 5 feet and 5'5". She wore a black Vanderbilt Under Armour pullover, black Vanderbilt print leggings, a hip band featuring the Vanderbilt logo, a black and green leopard print sports bra, black undershirt, and a white metal rope-style necklace. She has family connections in Louisiana, Texas, and Georgia, and the surnames Mangarelli and Hayes appear in her family tree. The woman known as Orchard Jane Doe was discovered on January 1st, 2023, but was likely in the woods behind Orchard Drive at least as early as 2016 and may have been missing for longer, even much longer. She was likely a female of European ancestry, probably 25 to 35 years of age, and between 5'1" and 5'8". But remember, stature is an estimate. Clothing found with the victim includes black size 8 or 8.5 shoes, size 14 Levi's, guy fit, low-rise jeans, and what's described as an extra-large green windbreaker jacket. If any of this sounds familiar to you, please reach out. Contact Detective Filter at Metro Nashville Police at 615-862-7803. You can also call Nashville Crime Stoppers at 615-74-CRIME or 27463. Callers remain anonymous and may qualify for a cash reward. Next time on The Fall Line, we continue our coverage of Nashville cold unidentified persons cases, this time focused on the John and Jane Does who may have been unhoused or experiencing housing insecurity at the time of their deaths. If you know of a case that should be covered on The Fall Line, there's a link to our case submission form in the show notes. Thank you for listening. The Fall Line is an independently produced show, and we appreciate listener support. It allows us to do research, obtain FOIAs, pay our content advisors, and support and donate to the causes we care about. And if you try out the products we advertise, please use our sponsor codes. It really helps. And take a moment to rate and review our show on your podcast app of choice. My book, Lay Them to Rest, which covers years of my life working on a Jane Doe case and the world of forensic scientists who resolve unidentified persons cases, is out everywhere now as hardcover, ebook, and audiobook, read by me. You can order it anywhere you get books and through your local library. Find out more through the link in our show notes. And if you'd like to support the show and the stories we cover, join us on Patreon or Apple Premium. 100% of our Patreon and Apple Premium earnings are supporting our Family Therapy Fund and actively paying for therapy for families who've appeared on the show. On Patreon, you can get early release, ad-free versions of our regular episodes for $5 a month. Or if you prefer Apple Premium, you can subscribe there as well. On Patreon, we also post occasional giveaways, updates, and blogs, which all patrons can enjoy, starting at just $1. The Fall Line is written, hosted, and researched by Laurah Norton, with additional research assistance from Brian Waters and Anna Luria. Interviews by Brooke Hargrove. Produced, engineered, and scored by Maura Curry. Content advisement by Brandy C. Williams. And, as always, our most special thanks to Liz Lipka.